Rally drivers, there's something special. You know, there's not a driver that can touch them, no matter what, you know, what they're in. They're a different breed, aren't they?
The golden era was the 90s. From rallying to touring cars, it was the 90s all day long.
That was like the pinnacle of rallying, really. I mean, the Group B stuff was quite wild, but then the Group A stuff, they had some brilliant cars.
So I grew up with the McRaes and obviously the Toyotas in UR Kankinen and Didier Oriel and all these kind of people. So for me, the 90s was the golden era of rallying.
90s rally had to follow the notorious Group B, which had already become legendary in popular culture. That didn't mean there wasn't any more room for new icons. In this episode, we meet with Sean and his wicked Lancia Delta collection, John with his 95 Subaru Impreza version 555, Jez from Macquarie Motorsport, and Adrian, who takes us through the valleys in his 98 Toyota Celica GT4.
A lot of the cars, they looked different, they sounded different, whereas we don't tend to get that in modern cars.
They look so much cooler, don't they? They're just, like I said, they tried different stuff and not all of it worked, you know, but it was just like, you know, some things were just completely outrageous. The boys told me stories where you'd have Mitsubishi testing up in the forestry, and they'd wander up and they'd give them a job then of running things up and down to the cars and to the teams, and that's why the rallying especially, it was so good to be able to get involved with things, because it didn't matter who you were, and even if the car goes off in front of you, everyone comes and wants to push, don't they, and get the car back onto the stage.
You look at old footage of 90s touring cars and saloon cars and look at old footage of the 90s rally cars. They're still changing gear and stuff. They're still using clutches and brakes and left foot braking. They weren't flipping paddles, and it's very much about that driver. And I think if you pitted a 90s driver against a modern day driver, I think there'd be something to be said about it. Do you know what I mean? These cars, these 90s stuff, the same with touring cars and British rallying, people could still achieve that look with their own road going cars. And I think that was a lot of the draw to it.
For all intents and purposes, you had a car which looked and drove and sounded like the cars you could have in the forest. So it made performance accessible. We've lost our way a little bit in rallying nowadays because the cars are so technical. They're just not available to the privateer, which they were back in the 90s era.
Back then, the cars looked like the production model. You can go into the showroom then and buy the car that you saw rallying on the telly. And now they're nothing at all like the cars that they're supposed to be based on, and they're all space frame thing, and I think they've gone so far away from, in my opinion, the grassroots rallying and what it should be, which was close as possible to the production cars, and that's why the Group A cars were so good. You know, the Lancias looked the same. I think Lancia had a similar thing where everyone went out and bought buying the Delta Integrale because it looked like the car they were seeing rallying. So yeah, much more influence than I think it has now.
My connection started in around about 1989, 1990. Drove to Columba Park, parked the car up in the woods, run through the woods and freezing cold, and as you do when we was younger, and saw these flying through the forest, and they just caught my eye. And then, you know, when we was going from stage to stage, the works cars was coming the opposite way and flashing us in this little baby 1600. I thought, wow, this is cool. Look at the big guys in the big cars flashing us, recognising what car we was in. And, you know, from that day, that's when I was sort of hooked on them. Now you're in here with Lancias. I'll just ask you one more time. Don't mention Celicas again. No, Celicas they were fantastic cars.
The Celicas started rallying in the ST165 version, sort of mid-late 90s. They evolved then into a 185, which Carlos Sainz won a couple of world championships with. And then we ended up with the final shape of the Celica, the ST205. As a child, I could sit in my bedroom window and just on the mountain over there, I could watch the rally cars from my bedroom window, watching the rallying throughout the forestries, just where we are here. So I grew up with the McRaes and obviously the Toyotas in UR Kankinen and Didier Oriel and all these kind of people. So for me, the 90s was the golden era of rallying.
Welsh rallying has always been renowned having some of the best roads in the world. They did the 28-mile stage around the back of all these valleys. It's a real shame they don't do anything else down here now. I don't think I realised how lucky I was to drive the stages down here, really. It's considering now where we've nearly lost all of it down South Wales. My father ran this workshop, but it was only his hobby, not a business. So he had his own rally and I was rallying with him, and he passed away. So I was left with this workshop with a couple of cars in, and it was all rented and everything. So it was a case of either make a business out of it or just sell everything. So yeah, that was about 9 years ago now, and yeah, it hasn't been easy, but then again, it shouldn't be, should it? The Lancias were good in their time. I think the Delta won, is it 6 events on the trot, World Championships. I mean, they did a lot of cheating back then, mind. You know, they had spare cars and everything, and we all know they did. Toyota had the fantastic cheat for the restrictor. We all know how good they engineered that. I think they got another like 50 or 60 horsepower out of that thing. Again, the engineering, isn't it? And looking at things and thinking, you know, how can we do this differently? I mean, you know, I know it was a cheat, but it was still a bloody good bit of engineering.
Subaru were the masters of doing limited edition runs. Absolute marketing genius. You look back on it now and you realise how many limited edition cars they made. And this is what they call a 555 edition. And this was mostly to commemorate Colin winning the '95 World Rally Championship. And that's where it spawned on from me. He sort of rallying back in sort of early 90s, and you'd hear the Subaru legacy that he started out with when he raced with Rothmans. And the sound of that EJ20 there's nothing else like it. There's nice engine sounds out there, but that engine sound is just absolutely unique to that car. And then growing up, I just knew that eventually I wanted that car in my life and I was going to make it happen. And you could happily daily these cars now. The noise, the feedback you get, the feel you get. 90s Japanese cars, that's what they were famous for, and that's what they did, and they knocked it out of the park.
There's just something about that era. You could get close to the rally, you could get close to the drivers. The noise of the cars, you know, they were, you know, the fire-spitting monsters, and you could hear them coming from miles away, and it just the whole excitement of it all.
Tell us about your connection with 90s Rally in the comments. Were you lucky enough to witness the madness? Or like me, did you fall in love with these iconic cars through video games? Follow Influx for the 6th and final episode of Cars That Made the 90s, where we explore motorsport.